Thanks. So today we'll go over basically what your responsibilities are once a disaster does happen in your community. And of course, you can put any questions you have in the chat, but we should also have a few minutes at the end if you wanted to, just come off mute and talk about it. But the cover photo we have here, as you can see in the caption, it's Chapman in 2008 when they were hit by a tornado, which is, of course, often accompanied by flooding and an issue that we have here, a common hazard in Kansas. Um, and so in this particular event, the tornado went right through the floodplain. And so it's often that you'll find that pattern that they kind of follow the same layout of the regulatory floodplain. And so when damage from any source happens in the floodplain, then we have to do an inspection and make substantial damage determinations. So that's what we'll go over today, a little bit about the background of the software, when and where to perform those assessments, and then just a little bit about using the software, and then resolving conflicts with damage estimation. So disaster recovery in general is a very difficult thing to do. It's probably some of the hardest work there is for floodplain administrators, and people are very emotional and passionate, of course, when they lose their home or have to come into compliance if they're substantially damaged. So it's very challenging. So what we want to do is prepare as much as we can on blue sky days. Basically, before anything happens, we can put things together to have in place to make it more streamlined and efficient because it is a difficult task. And so the more we can have to prepare for that, the better. We also have a post-flood responsibility class that's kind of related to this, and so we have that recorded, which kind of goes more into, yes, determinations, but also other things related to disaster recovery. So you might seek that out. Um, but there is also a film that we have on this. So FEMA put together an SDE like overview video of their own on using it, but there's lots of resources and materials out there related to this in addition to this course. And so if there ever is a disaster in your community, please reach out to us so that we're aware of that and we can, help you take questions from the public or even come out into the field with you and help you do damage estimations. And truth be told, I've never actually done it in the field, and no one has ever taken me up on my offer to help with those, but I would certainly be happy to do it, and it would be a good experience for me as well. So we try to reach out when we become aware of disasters. We reach out to communities to offer assistance once we're made aware through the media or through our state hazard mitigation officer of flooding or a tornado or really anything that's happened. So, of course, stay in communication with us. Um, but as I mentioned, there's other resources. So there is the damage estimator user manual and field workbook. So that's one of the main resources that goes with this software. They also have best practices that I'll show you. But another good resource is the Substantial Improvement in Damage Desk Reference. So I think everyone should have a copy of this. It goes very much into detail about what counts towards a determination, getting market value, and what kinds of additions or remodeling would constitute a substantial improvement because damage and improvement basically are two sides of the same coin and they both count towards that 50% threshold of the market value that would trigger the requirements for that structure to come into compliance with the current regulations, which would include the current base flood elevation. So that could mean having to elevate an existing structure, which is very expensive. And so it's definitely something to pay attention to and for property owners to pay attention to. So as I mentioned already, if damage from any source or an improvement, the cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of the market value is what triggers that requirement. So you have these two publications that are really helpful. And the user manual obviously goes into use of the software and troubleshooting and that kind of stuff. And then there's this best practice document. So it's just like a 16-page document that goes over the best practices of doing the data collection and the field work. So it's something to familiarize yourself with before you have to start doing assessments so that you're prepared and you have these things ready to go as much as possible. Um, so that might mean getting your list of addresses that are in the floodplain and having that database loaded up into your software ahead of time, and having that property database. And we can provide you with a list of your addresses that are impacted by the regulatory floodplain. That should be easy enough for us to put together. And then you would just make those property files and just have it in your software. So you can download the SDE software. It's free and it just, lives on your server, and you can have that shared with anyone that you work with and who would be assisting you with the assessments. And so um, this is really helpful, how to, identify them, take pictures, organize them so that you don't get things mixed up because, like I said, it's very stressful. It's time consuming and we're trying to get through it quickly. So we want to have this organized structure ready to go. And so, um, best practices of finding the best fit structure use for non-residential structures. And as you can see, the GPS data that you'll need and the photo standards and all of that. So I would definitely recommend going through this, reading this, and then have your property database. And that way, again, you're ready to go when something happens. And so you can find it easily online. And they should have a helpline that you can call, but of course, right now we are unable to communicate with FEMA for the time being, but they do have this built into it as well. And then there are classes online. I think most of these should be available, but they're basically independent study classes that you can take. So they have the SDE training modules. So I believe they give you like some fake data that you can use to go through and simulate doing a damage assessment. They have training modules on YouTube. And so you have these resources as well to train yourself and familiarize yourself with the software. So I think that's another important thing is watching these trainings and then just go in and toy around with the software and get used to how it works. It can be a little bit finicky. Basically, if you edit anything, you have to save that page over and over again. But yeah, if you just kind of play around with it and just get used to it. So I think this takes about 3 hours on this course. Um, but it gives you guidance on using the software and what values you should be seeing, based on your input and just familiarize yourself with it. And of course, it's not a requirement that you use this software. You don't have to use the SDE software to do assessments. It's just a tool that FEMA put up out there for you to be able to make defensible assessments and determinations. And towards the end of it, it will auto-generate a report for you that you can have attached with your determination letter that just kind of lets the property owner know what values you used to make that determination. And then, of course, they can appeal your decision with better data. So it's a nice tool to use. I think, I would definitely be using it if I were dealing with disaster recovery. And so we only have to worry about the areas of special flood hazard areas. So we only have to do determinations that are within those boundaries, even if other areas are impacted. We're only concerned with the structures that we're regulating. So AE zone, AH, AO, all of that. So yeah, if this neighborhood, this subdivision was impacted, we're only looking at those 4 or 5 houses that are actually in the special flood hazard area within those boundaries. And so creating a map like this, a disaster map that has the overlay of the impacted areas with the special flood hazard area is a good place to start. So your community GIS department or whomever in the community would be capable of doing that. I think we should be able to assist in some ways, perhaps, generating maps. If that was a need for the community, I think we could probably assist with that. Like I said, we can definitely get you your property list of those in the special flood hazard area, and then you'd be able to have that much of it completed. But so this is the Eureka tornado path from 2016, and so the city put this together, um, the tornado pathway, and then the green represent structures in the special flood hazard area. So you can see where that overlays and which structures need to be assessed. And so once you have that list specifically, then you can start planning out your schedule for doing the field work and collecting that data. And so again, in this case, it very well followed the pathway of the special flood hazard area. You can see most of the most of those structures were in that pathway. And so you just compare those, do that overlay, and then start planning it. So um, officials that participate in the NFIP must determine whether the proposed work qualifies as substantial improvement or repair of substantial damage. So as I mentioned, it can be damage from any source, not just flooding, but it could be a fire or a tornado, earthquake, whatever happens from any cause. And it's the cost to repair to the pre-damage condition, not pristine condition, just however it was before. And we do take into consideration things like depreciation over time and things like that. And so when you do these assessments and then you give them the determination, it can be hard for people to understand why they have to come into compliance, especially if it was something like a fire or unrelated to flooding, that they are in the floodplain and they still now have to come into compliance with the current regulations. So again, it's difficult, but we have a lot of resources ready to go. We have lots of templates. We have our post-disaster packet that gives you um, the the worksheets that you could use for data collection in the field and like I said, template letters for a flood determination or anything else. We have multiple letter templates based on the situation, whether they were below or above 50%. So we have that. Of course, you can always use us as a resource. We're happy to talk with property owners as well. And we're kind of in an objective third party, so that can come in handy. And we've certainly done that before. Um, so the definitions, damage of any origin sustained, where the cost of restoring it to its pre-damage condition equals or exceeds 50% of the market value. And again, the same thing with improvement, which can be harder to catch. People don't always realize they need a permit from you to do their internal remodel or rehabilitation, but they do because, again, that cost contributes to this threshold. So reconstruction, rehabilitation, addition, or other improvements, the cost of which equals or exceeds 50% of that market value before the start of construction. So if they hit that limit, that's what triggers it. And we typically track this over a 1-year period. People will try to stagger permits, like every 6 months, get a different permit for a different part of the same project. So that's what we're trying to track there, that they're not hitting that trigger mark at 50%. And then some communities have cumulative improvement over a period of 5 or 10 years. And so they're tracking it over that period of time, and either damage or improvements will contribute to that threshold. Um, so yeah, the term includes structures which have incurred substantial damage regardless of the actual repair work performed. So sometimes people won't do the full repairs to the pre-damaged condition because it's too expensive or whatever the case may be. We're still counting that. Regardless of if they actually do that repair work, we still have to count all of the damage towards that 50%, whether the work is repaired or performed or not. And so there are exceptions to this, and you can find all of this information again in the substantial improvement and damage desk reference, but it does exclude any project for improvement of a structure that is to correct an existing violation that was cited by a community official. So if they had already had a citation from the health or sanitary department or um, building code or building official, whatever the case may be, if they have that documented, then that can be exempted. And then alterations of a historic structure that would not preclude it from being continued designated as a historic structure. So all of that information can be found in that desk reference. Okay, so these suggestions, I guess, are really in an ideal world where you would have all the help that you need to organize teams and complete all of this work um, with other people helping you. And so I know there's a lot of communities that have very small departments and they're understaffed and they may not be able to do all of this. Of course, as I mentioned, we're always here. Depending on the scope of the disaster, we may be stretched thin and be assisting multiple communities at one time, but we are here as a resource to help you figure these things out and again, do some of the field work and collect that data. Obviously, I don't have the authority from your community to make actual determinations, but I can assist with that in any way that you would need. Um, so definitely please rely on us, reach out to us. You'll probably be contacted by KDEM as well. I know they assist in doing assessments, and I think that's pretty much how it's gone in the past. Again, I haven't been contacted, but of course I'm happy to do that. So as the SDE manager and the floodplain manager, you would be identifying the resources, notifying officials. So you would want to let your local police department know that you'd be going out into the field and doing inspections because we do actually have to enter the structure to assess the internal damage as well as the exterior. So letting those other departments know. Um, and coordinating with them. So fire, police, emergency planning, building, whoever needs to know about this. And then you would be planning the field inspection. So who's going where, how long that's going to take. You want to organize and train your inspectors. So training typically consists of doing at least one or two residential and non-residential inspections all together so that everyone's on the same page about ranking the percentage of damage because it is a bit of a judgment call and we don't want people to be like wildly different in their estimations. And then supervising them and then coordinating the follow-up with the structure owners. So of course, reaching out to them, letting them know they need a permit to do any repairs and of course their damage determination and what you've estimated it to be. So the limits of that inventory, all the damaged structures in the special flood hazard area that were impacted by this disaster, and then coordinate those addresses and tax parcel map or property boundaries. So you'd probably be working with the community appraiser to get some of this data, and then do an initial screening of the structures. So that's your windshield inspection where you try to assess in general how badly these structures were impacted. And then kind of prioritizing them by least damage and then medium and high damage. So your first priority is actually the most medium damaged because those are the ones that are close to 50% on one side or the other. And of course, people are going to want to start doing repairs immediately and get back to their normal lives. So you want to prioritize those and get those done first. And then the least damage, next because, they still need a permit to do those repairs and they still need to be inspected, but we're not concerned that it's going to hit that threshold where they might actually have to do some serious work, including elevating their lowest floors. And then the most damaged that are obviously beyond substantially damaged are least prioritized. They go last because that's a lot of work to repair. Obviously, they're going to need to, get their determination, their inspections, but if it's beyond fully damaged, we don't to the point where we don't have to do an inspection to make that determination, it's clearly substantially damaged, then we can work with them on what needs to happen for their repairs and their permitting. So once you have that kind of organized, which properties need to go first and your entire inventory of properties, then you can finalize your planning for the data collection. Um, Ideally, it would be two-person teams to go together, um, for safety and for, you know, quality assurance, looking at something and making sure you agree on it, having two people do the inspection, and then, scheduling them, how long it will take, how many days you need to be in the field, and then assigning data and quality assurance lead roles to stay on track. So hopefully you would have someone with you to help you organize and assess all of the data collection and just make sure everything's quality, making sure every single property had an inspection and that there's no overlap or any gaps in that. And that in itself can take a couple of days. It's just once you have all of the data, getting it organized and getting those assessments completed. So again, notifying those other departments that you'll be out in the field and doing that, and what your proposed dates are, issuing a press release, why you're doing inspections, what that process looks like, when you'll be doing that, and how to contact you about that. Because again, you're going to be entering people's homes, so that's an important step. And then gathering your resources, so you have all of your property and structure data in the field with you. Um, it could be hard copies, you could be on tablets and putting that data in the software as you go along, or however you want to do that, but just having that process in place, your floodplain boundaries, your two-person inspection teams, and then talking with the tax assessor to discuss what data needs and format to determine how much time they're going to need to assemble that for you. And that's typically because you'd be using that data to determine the market value. However, there are multiple ways to determine the market value. And that is all explained in the substantial damage and improvement desk reference, but we'll talk a little bit about it here. But you can do a basic calculation in the software. And then, of course, again, your scheduling, many inspections can be completed per day, and then your target date for completion of the field work. So again, we want to get it done as quickly as possible because people are eager to do their repairs. So the inspection lead understands what data needs to be collected in the field for those requirements for doing the determination, is familiar with the software, coordinates the collection of field materials, and verifies per day how many hours that is. You're working with the city officials, making sure all the requirements are followed, you're tracking progress, verifies the data that has been recorded, and then reviews it for correctness, and finding solutions to any problems. There could be properties that you're not being allowed into or that you might have to get permission from or whatever the case may be. Um, and then identify the areas that are inaccessible, right? So you don't want to do these inspections until it's safe to do so, so that, like power lines have been, dealt with or gas leak or something like that. But yeah, ideally you would have someone or yourself that can do this lead, and then you'd have people assisting you with the data collection and then data review. Of course, the tax data, so the address, and in the software, you'd want to verify the NFIP information in that tab. And so we'll look at the software, but basically there's a tab that has the NFIP info, like the um, map panels, map dates, that kind of thing. And then in your property file for the assessments, you would want to sort them alphabetically by street name and then numerically by address. And then, as I mentioned, that would be accompanied with like some GPS data. Um, and so just depending on what formatting you get, some of this information, it could be limited sorting abilities, or organized by owner name or parcel number. So you just want to, you know, maybe get with your person now to discuss, what data you would need from them in the event of a disaster. Like, hey, if something like this happens, a tornado, this is the kind of information I would need from you. And that way they're at least aware of it. And then you want to verify locations at the physical inspection, and the square footage and number of stories. So that goes into market value. Um, and then you're taking pictures with the address written in front of that structure so that it's easy to identify when you're sorting that data later, because you'd be taking pictures inside and outside. So verify the tax data with the inspection findings, and then again, structure data can be preloaded into the software. So you'd have those individual structure records, and then there is an enterprise import function in the software, so you can upload multiple property and structure data. You can pre-populate certain tabs like the community name, and those map panels would typically be the same for everybody. But you can import Excel files or CSV files into it as well. Um, and then this is where you can download it. Again, there's a user manual, and then that's also just available in the software. You can open the user manual from there. But you have two versions, the standalone, which is only the host computer, or you have client server where multiple people can access the same database once you have it on the network drive. So that might be useful if you have a lot of people that are contributing to that data collection. And then, of course, if it's a house fire, that would probably be just one structure, but it would still need to be assessed. And then in this case, it's clearly substantially damaged. So you don't have to do the full assessment, but you would want to send them that determination, complete with pictures, and then that they would need a permit to rebuild, and it would essentially be considered new construction. Um, I guess there has been a misconception that damage assessments are only done if there's a presidential disaster declaration, which I'm not sure where that would be stemming from, but of course that's not accurate. It's just a declaration would open up more resources for recovery from the federal side, potentially, but yeah, estimations have to do any time there's damage in the special flood hazard area. Of course, multiple structures. So this was Coffeyville, 2007. There was a flood, and then somehow the refinery ended up leaking all of this industrial material, this oil, into a bunch of houses that were flooded, and so that contributed to them being a complete loss. And then they ended up having to pay out to buy out those structures, which is really unfortunate. Displaced a lot of people. There was almost 400 buyouts. And so that was pretty intense, but we are again available for assistance, but we're also likely to do a full audit of your recovery about a year after the disaster just to assess your recovery and how it went basically in making sure that you did all those assessments and issued those permits and people came into compliance if that was a requirement. And we just do that and then help you with any retroactive permitting or things that need to be done in the aftermath. So values versus repairs to give you your percent of damage. So um, and your fair market value prior to the damage is compared to the cost of those repairs to return to that same condition prior to the damage. And then if that percentage is equal to or greater than 50%, then it's substantially damaged. So using the SDE software may not be required if you have contractors, estimations. So yeah, uh, some communities just require people to get a licensed contractor to give them that estimation. Or if you have adjuster claims data and the tax assessment, that's enough information to plug into the formula. And you can enter that data into the tool manually. Um, right. Okay. So the fair market value is for the structure only, and that excludes the land. And that's important because I've seen a lot of people just take the number from an appraisal and they don't exclude the land from that. And so that has led to some mistakes in the past where people were declared not substantially damaged, but they were, but the market value included the land. So that's something to know. And this data can come from tax assessment records, a bill of sale if it was recent, an insurance settlement, or an appraisal. So the appraisal is the most accurate. It's, an individual appraisal from a licensed appraisal. Insurance settlements, something might be underinsured, so that's not always the best method. Bill of sale, of course, we talk about depreciation, and so if it wasn't recent, that's probably not accurate. And then tax assessment records are pretty popular. They're readily available and they're public. Everyone knows about it, so that's a reasonable way to go. It's just whichever methodology you decide on, just be consistent with everybody. Um, and then, of course, people can appeal your decision and they can provide you with something like an appraisal that's more accurate than what data you used. And then you can reissue a new determination based on better data. Um, so this is what this software looks like. As I said, you can calculate an estimated cash value using this. So there's like the base cost and then geographic adjustment. And then you would have these different features of the house that it might have. How many square feet and then how many stories. And so they have this built in if you need it. So you don't have to use this. You can, as I said, just enter it manually if you want to, if you have that data already. And then just any cost adjustments for these specific features that it might have, like a fireplace or like those different things. So additional costs for these non-standard features, a fireplace, a porch, upgraded roof or floor. So the quality of that component that exceeds the normal features in the initial construction quality. Um, and then there are residential cost estimating guides. Your appraiser might have one. I know they have software for that now as well. Um, and yeah, and then of course the cost of materials has to be included. So we use the fair market value, and then that also applies to any materials donated. So the cost to repair is the cost to repair, regardless of if some of those materials were donated or if people do their own repairs, we still have to include the cost of qualified labor. Um, it includes repairs that people choose not to make. None of that really matters. It's just the cost to repair is what it is, regardless of any of that. Um, and then the cost of labor, as I mentioned, so there are those cost estimating guides. That's the Marshall and Swift book. Even volunteer labor, we still have to include the cost of what that would be, whether it was volunteer or not. But we can exclude costs like debris removal, cleanup, permitting plans, permit fees. Um, you can even soften it a little bit on them and just waive the permit fee if you want to, especially in cases where people are, dealing with these very expensive repairs and potentially having to come into compliance. So that's always an option. It's up to the community to decide that. Um, and it would be a good place in your administrative procedures to include a section on substantial damage and how you will resolve disputes and how you can have that methodology explained in there. You can explain how you will determine the market value, and of course, how they can appeal your decision. And then that way, no one can claim that you're treating them unfairly or you're showing favoritism if you have this written out and you just follow the same procedures every time you do it. And so that's why it's important to be consistent with, excuse me, being consistent with your methodology, however you decide to do that. So we don't have to go through all of this, but again, it's in the substantial damage desk reference. But these are the costs that we include, again, regardless of anything donated or volunteered. Um, the labor, any excavation, demolition, removal of debris, um, elevating that structure, any construction, supervision, sales tax, those structure elements that are part of the actual structure. So the finishes, foundation, walls, windows, roof, um, the finishing on everything, cabinets, carpets, doors, hardware, any utilities and appliances that are built in to the structure. Plug-in appliances don't count. So those are excluded along with cleanup, emergency repairs for stabilization, a land survey, carpeting over a finished floor, outdoor, anything not part of the structure, so any landscaping, that kind of stuff, we don't look at that. Um, and again, work that is correcting an existing cited violation. Um, and then again, itemized cost sources and itemized cost of materials and labor, building valuation tables are again cost estimating guides, or if you have a local official that's qualified to give an estimate in their professional judgment. And then building owners are the least reliable if they have, but they can provide that if they have supporting documentation like receipts. So we don't just want to take their word for it. They need that documentation. Okay, let's move on. So deferred maintenance, it's basically things that were already um, needing repair before the damage happened. So we don't count that if there was already peeling paint, old shingles, or the window caulking, that kind of stuff. Again, we're looking at the cost to restore a pre-disaster condition and not pristine condition, which I feel like it may be difficult to determine what is deferred maintenance and what is part of the damage, but yeah, we do have this little caveat. Um, and so again, one way to resolve disputes is to just not have them in the first place if you have your procedures spelled out in writing, and the same rules will apply to everyone. So you can have those written rules approved by the governing body, and just kind of make it official. Um, yeah. Okay. Just looking through my notes here, see if I missed anything. Right. Avoid conflict. We don't want property owners or contractors to assess their own damages. We, as the floodplain manager, need to do that. again, they're not objective. Contractors might be trying to get business, and so that's different from getting a contractor estimate. So having those inconsistencies can delegitimize the assessments that we provide, community-wide, and opens the door for those um, complaints or disputes. Some communities have a moratorium on issuing permits until the scope and location of damage is evaluated. Um, some communities will go out like basically the morning after something happens and put door hangers onto um, each resident that's been impacted in the special flood hazard area. As soon as you have those impacted addresses, giving them a door hanger that has information about getting permits, about you doing inspections, um, and information about substantial damage and compliance and repairs and just we have a lot of those handouts and information like that on our NFIP resources webpage. So you can pull those together and really, in theory, you could put them together now and just have them ready to go. I've always been in favor of that just because it's kind of like immediate contact with the property owner. So basically, before they can start on repairs, you've already gone in person and given them physical copies of like a permit application, letting them know about permitting and inspections and just being in contact with them. You put your contact information in there as well, and they can't complain that they didn't know that they were supposed to get a permit from you, or that there may be compliance requirements. So, we don't want people being able to claim that because it does happen. Like, I didn't know I was supposed to do this and the work is already done. So it can be very difficult to do enforcement at that point. So we want to get ahead of it as much as we can. And then you may issue permits if property owners provide a contractor's estimate proving that it's less than substantially damaged. And then, of course, remembering if your community does have those cumulative standards to look back over the last 5 years or whatever the case may be for any previous permitting, because then we would add that cost into our determination. So we want it to track and make sure that those are dated. And yeah. So the non-residential element percentages, so there's a difference between the residential and non-residential in the software. So they're completely different types of assessment because, of course, we're looking at different things, and a non-residential building is going to have like different features associated with it. So we have the element percentages. So once you've determined those percentages, you would enter them here. So we have the foundation, the superstructure, the roof covering, plumbing, electrical, interiors, and the HVAC. And so that will help you compute your damages. So yeah, on the bottom right side, you'll see the total of that. Oops. Okay, so and then residential element percentages. So we have, these different things that make it livable. Different characteristics. Aside from the foundation and the superstructure, we have these interior finishings, cabinets and countertops and appliances, interior finish, and those kinds of things. So once you've determined those percentages, you've gathered all the field data, you enter it into the software, and then it will help you compute those values based on that. And so the field guide does have guidance on how to rank those types of damages, because I think it'd be hard to associate the level of damage with a specific percentage until you've done it a few times and you have worked with your team and everyone's kind of on the same page with how you rank that thing. But the field guide does have notes on what to look for. So like for the foundation, damage that's significant enough to affect the overall stability of the foundation. So you might see a settlement or lateral displacement, cracking that's not visible from the exterior. And so emergency management will often go through and evaluate the stability and safety of a structure. So that's another thing. You might have other departments or entities doing inspections for different things. Um, and so people may think that they've already been inspected, but they actually haven't as far as substantial damage. So that's why the press release is important and, wearing something that identifies you as a community official and then, letting people know that you're inspecting damage specifically for this reason. But the field guide is very helpful, I think, if you go through it with your team and just kind of um, determine how you're going to do things, but also what to look for as far as damage. So I find this helpful, especially for those who haven't done it before, like myself, that I would use this as a guide to determine those percentage levels for these different features. So this is just a snippet of a table from the guidance on how to rate things, but you can definitely look through there and it's very detailed. So just limits of what the software can and can't do. It doesn't provide the exact values for the element percent damage. That's on you, and um, it's dependent on your input. So because of the three options for determining structure value and damages, those determinations depend on your methodology and the data that you enter. But it does have a formalized and organized approach for estimating substantial damage and improvement. It's reasonable and defensible. It's structure specific, and it demonstrates compliance with the NFIP requirements. It's a FEMA accepted method for making determinations. And then again, it generates reports that can be included with your determination letter. And that gives them a summary of how you did the determination. And then they can also be used to support an ICC claim. So if they're substantially damaged and they make a flood insurance claim, of course, if the disaster was a flood, they can apply for the increased cost of compliance, which is an extra $30,000 on top of their um, claim that helps them to come into compliance with current regulations. So 30,000 really isn't that much if you're trying to elevate a structure or something like that, but it is available. So you have this organized electronic database that documents compliance, and you have those reports with it. So very useful. Again, you don't have to use the software, but it's an available tool, and FEMA supports it, obviously. So you want to select server if you're in charge of assigning the damage assessment, or client if you're one of the inspector teams that's receiving assignments, or you can do a standalone if you're not a supervisor or a client. Yeah, I've only used the standalone just for my own, training purposes like this. So that's what I have. And saving data, again, I mentioned you have to hit save button a lot, sorry. Before you go through the different tabs, you want to hit save. So if you're unable to save things, you might need to go to the installation instructions. I've never had an issue with this software, but I guess you might need to like uninstall and reinstall it or something like that, or you can work with your IT. But basically, you don't want to spend recovery time dealing with technical difficulties, which is why I mentioned, downloading it now and having your database ready to go before something happens. So this is how the main part looks like. Um, when you hit view or search all records, that's where your property records would be. So you would have your property database in there. And then once you're doing assessments, you can just pull it up and then start an assessment for it. Um, Again, the user manual is there. It's built into the software, and it has more information on installation, and you can read that after you have it installed. And so this is the most recent version. They did update it at some point. I'm not sure when it came out, but this is version 3.0. And so you can enter default data, which is useful if you're just one city with one map panel. You can just have that pre-populated. There's spell check, photo editing, and the enterprise import. And then I guess the older versions didn't have non-residential, but of course now there's the two different types. Um, right, let's see. Oops. Okay, sorry, just making sure I didn't miss anything here. All right. And so when you're in there, you would pick the type of structure. And so they do have an extensive list, but it's not everything. So you'd want to pick um, a best fit type of description for the type of building that you're assessing. And then you can always write more information in there. But basically, there's not a comprehensive list. So there's, like hospital, school, um, religious building, whatever the case may be, but there's not, everything. So like ag structures might need a best fit type of choice on that. Um, Common mistakes, brick veneer is siding and it's not actually brick. So it's not a superstructure. I think usually it's pretty obvious if it's a veneer and not actual brick. Uninhabitable doesn't always mean substantially damaged. I mentioned gas leaks. It could be unsafe to enter, but once that's fixed, it's not actually substantially damaged. And then apartment buildings should be under a non-residential assessment, I guess. And then training inspections, ideally you would do 3 pilot inspections as the first 3, guiding and training materials. Everyone has all their worksheets. We understand the data collection and taking photos and all of that. So the differences between residential and non-residential and the things that we're looking for. So you saw the list of characteristics that we look for in a non-residential assessment. Um, So the benefits of the tool: reduce entry and increase consistency. We'd want to review the procedures for the GPS units and the data required for a valid assessment, and inspecting uh, interaction guidance, and then assessments take 40 to 90 minutes, typically for residential, and then 40 to 120 minutes for non-residential. Of course, we want to be thorough and accurate in that. And not all elements are equal. Some contribute more value to the market value, like the HVAC. So this is, again, what it looks like when you open the tool. You can click on the standalone, and then you can see the add property. That's where your property list goes. And then you would start either a residential or non-residential assessment. And then towards the bottom right, that's how you can upload, like mass upload. So if you get error messages, you just close it. Okay, sorry. So yeah, add new property. That's how you start, and then this is what it looks like. So it, it asks for all the property details, and then this is where you can have some things pre-populate, like the city, the state, and county. Those won't change between different properties. And then it asks for the NFIP information, the parcel data, the Latin long, so there's your GPS data, the structure type, so that's where you get the list of different types of structures, and then you put all that information in here. So this is just an example of that type of data. And then it asks for the initial construction quality, which most of the time is just standard, and then what the depreciation rate is. And the user manual goes into how to determine depreciation levels. And then, of course, the percent damage of those different elements. Um, Again, having that data in your office ready to go before going to a property is good. Some potential sources would be elevation certificates, your permit files, information from your county appraiser, um, cost estimation guides, and then, of course, your mapping information, and then the percent damages from the field inspections. And then you take pictures, you have the timestamp on, or the date as well included on that. And then you have this kind of establishing shot. And then you'd want to have someone there, also a picture of someone standing there with the actual property address written out, visible, like on a whiteboard. A lot of people would take whiteboards with them and put that on there. And that way you have that establishing shot and you know exactly which property it is. Of course, you'd want to get your ferment, your flood data, as well as, your area of impact versus the special flood hazard area. And then you can work with your GIS department to get these, you take the GPS data in the field, but you also have your Latin long here. And then field inspections. So water lines are a good thing to capture just for your information and for us, just tracking historical floods. So this is a mud line on a fence. If it's that high, we would typically look at the water line on a manufactured home, and depending on the duration, it's probably substantially damaged. Manufactured homes don't stand up as well as typical construction to flood damage. And then information from the appraiser website. So a lot of these are just publicly available, and you can find a lot of the data that it asks for, you know, original construction, the date that it was built, and then, like how many stories and that kind of stuff as well. And then you can add a residential assessment. As you saw, the residential has more elements than the non-residential, and so you just start this. And then once you start an assessment, you can, pull up the property and add it that way. So, yep, you just use the selected property because you'll have your property database already put together. And then again, you can have some of this pre-populate. And then, so what I'm saying, you can start your property database now, and you'd have a lot of this information you can already have pulled in based on data that you can get from the appraiser or the appraiser's website. And then again, pre-populated. So um, yeah, again, it's just easier if you get into the software and just start playing around with it. And once you start putting properties in there, it should start to make sense. And then of course, save like every time, because then if you move between tabs without saving, it'll just erase everything. And then you see the little green like thumbtacks there. If you save it and you're missing something, it will kind of give you a little note, like a red thumbtack that lets you know that you're missing information. Um, and so yeah, there's errors in your assessment to correct. So it does have this kind of like check factor. To make sure that you're not missing information. And then, yeah, you just use the information to fill out the address tab. It's very straightforward. Right, the street suffix, cause of damage. So it asks for the inspector's information. Of course, the NFIP information is the same. And then it asks you all this information about the structure, like how many stories, residence type, is it single family residence or whatever, roof covering, exterior finish. So it has all of this, and then you can have community specific information you can type in, and then of course the error stuff. So I guess this is kind of like an older software. It's built off of like older versions of software, so it's not super up to date, but it is still, functional, and that kind of thing. And then this is the cost calculator. So it will help you calculate a cost if you just want to use it that way in the tool. Again, there's other ways to determine market value, as discussed earlier, and of course in the improvement in damage desk reference, it goes over that, but you can just calculate it in here. And of course, people can provide you with better information if they have it, if they dispute what you've given them. So ask you for number of stories, the square feet, the shape of the structure, if you want to add a description, and then it will just calculate. And then a second story is a common error to forget to enter the number of stories, and then you have your base cost per square foot, which will change, regionally. That number will be something different, but you should be able to find that information easily enough, and then it'll just give you this computed value. Um, so depreciation over time, very poor condition, or requires extensive repairs. Some repairs, average condition, above average condition if it's like brand new, um, or excellent condition, so less than 2 years old. Um, so it gives you these guides on how to determine that, and I see I'm going over time. Oh my goodness, I lost track of time, so sorry. So these are examples of sales from a county appraiser. Again, cost estimation guides, those are available. They can be expensive, but they're out there. Element percentages, again, you'd enter that. I talked about something being obviously substantially damaged. This is an example of the worksheet. Again, we have these available in our post-disaster packet, or on our website, we have it. And then once you've done all that, you have your output summary. It gives you what percentage you've determined. Right. Oh, and it shows you like computed damages or a contractor estimate or a community estimate. You can enter it that way. And then for the market value, a professional market appraisal or the computed cash value from the calculator or an adjusted tax assessed value. The tab where you can upload those photos. Again, you'd want to take a whiteboard with you and have the property address along with the establishing shot. Um, and then the summary report I mentioned. This is what that looks like. And then you can sign it and send it with your letter. So it's very straightforward, and it gives all of that information to the property owner. You want to make sure that you have saved everything properly. Um, so there are common questions. Again, code violations are not damaged. Right. Finished basements, if they want to restore that, yes, that counts. And of course, if it's substantially damaged and has to come into compliance, then they would have to fill in that basement, which is really not fun to deal with. And then, of course, dispute resolution, a licensed contractor estimate, a professional estimator, insurance, estimator groups are available, or like a licensed appraiser, of course. Again, put your methodology in your procedures. And then that's it. I am so sorry that we went over. I didn't like realize how late it was getting. Okay. So I did see, oops. Okay, stop sharing my screen.
Questions in the chat here.
Okay. Okay. So if the FEMA map was down, would it have impacts on reporting? I don't think so. We always have our effective viewer available as well, so but you should definitely have copies of your map. Um, okay. For one property, you could have multiple assessments. I mean, yes, you would have multiple assessments for different disasters or damage events that have happened to it. Oh my gosh, a house that was flooded, then caught fire during the flood. That's crazy. Oh, you had to do two separate assessments for that. I think I would count that as one single event and one assessment if it happened at the same time, but I see how it could be too. Yeah. Um, does anyone want to come off mute to ask anything? Um, Keegan, do you want to launch the CFM question under polls? Okay, there we go. So this is just asking if you would like a certificate or not. I will send out a follow-up survey. Again, I'm really sorry that we went over time or if anyone had to drop off because of that. It's yeah. And then we'll have this recording available as well. And then we do have another training coming up this week if you wanted to sign up for that.
Hi, I just have a quick question. My name is George Ibrahim. I'm from New Jersey. I was just listening in because this is very helpful for us.
Mhm.
And we actually have cumulative substantial damage as of January of this year. And this was a question came up, and I just wanted to confirm we have the right answer. So let's say there's like two separate events that are 2 or 3 years apart. How do
Mhm.
you uh, I guess, do the cumulative. It's are you adding the percentages for each event until you reach the 50? Question was basically in regards to the value of the property, because that could change from year to year. So what
Right.
is the appropriate way to do that?
I think it would be adding in the cost, whatever that cost was to the cost of the current event, and then having that compared to the current market value, I would think.
Okay. I think, yeah, then it's the same answer. You figure out the
Right.
damage over the assessed value for that year, you get that percentage, and then you do
I'm
the other events separately and you pretty much add.
Add them. Right. I
Okay.
think so. And I think you could also look in the improvement desk reference. I think it would probably be explained in there as well. And then you'd probably want to put that in your written administrative procedures.
Yeah, I just don't recall seeing it, but I
Hmm.
just wanted to confirm. So thank you.
Yep, no problem. Okay, and Maryland is saying that Illinois advises percentages, so adding percentages rather than cost. But I guess it might vary state to state. Great. Well, thanks everyone for being here. I should have those certificates out later this week, I should think. But um, thank you and have a great rest of your day. Yeah, thanks for all your input, Marilyn. I appreciate it.